lead us off with some practice. So go ahead and start off in silence. I'll offer some guidance. Please mute if you aren't muted. And once we transition into discussion mode, you can unmute if you have something to say. We'll begin just taking a moment to establish and settle into a posture we can use for practice. As Shinzen says, to straighten up and settle in, letting the base, the lowest part of our body, sink into and connect with the ground. And our spine grow up tall and relaxed, yet upright and alert from that base. And as we sit, let's bring our attention to sensations in our body. So, attending to any body sensations that we're experiencing, maybe physical body sensations or emotional body sensations, pleasant or unpleasant, gross or subtle. Focus on body sensations. As you tend to body sensations, you're aware of anything else in the world, sounds, sights, thoughts, emotions, and pardon me, just thoughts, including emotional body sensations. And let that be without doing anything about it, keeping your attention as much as possible just on the pure embodied experience. use the posture, use of the positioning of your body to attend to your body more and more completely. Finding out how to relax into, let go into body sensations. Relax out of, let go of stories about body experience, stories about anything else. So that with our posture, we attend to our bodies. This is an exploration, and so you can feel free to try different things. Try holding your posture in different ways, moving your attention in different ways. Find out how to do it, how to attend to body sensations. You can do this sitting, standing up, lying down, walking, in any position whatsoever. Whatever position you're in, exploring how to use that position to attend to the body directly. What's it like if you shift a little bit to one side or the other? You tilt or turn part of your spine or head in one way or another, subtly, slightly, or a lot. What happens? Does that make it easy to focus on body sensations? Does it make it challenging? Continuing with this exploration of attention to the body, As we work with our posture in this way, there are two things that are happening. One is that just through attending to the posture, through moving our bodies, through exploring how our bodies are oriented in space, we're already directly attending to our bodies. It's helping bring us out of our stories and into direct experience of body sensations in this moment. And the other thing is that we are discovering how to set things up, how it can be that without effort, without ongoing work, we naturally attend to body sensations. And discovering how to make use of the circumstances of our body to shape and direct the flow of our attention so that we can increasingly let go and release into that. And see if there isn't any joy in that. As you sit, just giving in to body experience at this moment, even if it's unpleasant, uncomfortable, there's challenging feelings or emotions coming up. See if there isn't some amount of joy just in being able to relax into that experience. Just in not having to fight with or change or get rid of that experience. And just allowing it and giving into it. Again, exploration is how to use the posture, how to use the positioning of our body, the way we hold our body to attend to body experience. How to attend not merely by trying to control the attention with our mind, but by using our body directly to direct the attention to our body. The Buddha called this technique mindfulness of the body in the body, or mindfulness of the body with the body, not mindfulness of the body with the mind, mindfulness of the body with intention, attention, but mindfulness of the body with the body. And discover how to use the body itself to do this practice. Other things this technique is not called include, for example, mindfulness of getting rid of the mind with the body, mindfulness of fighting with experience with the body, mindfulness of uh, feeling dejected about how we can't do this practice with the body. Not that we're trying to fight with, get rid of, prevent, or even change any of our other experience, thoughts, sights, or sounds. We're just temporarily letting go of concern with those so that we can focus on the body with the body. And just allowing whatever experience is happening to happen, allowing body sensations and anything else in the universe. Whatever it is, pleasant or unpleasant, comfortable or uncomfortable. Okay. Oh, nice to practice with you. Um, Thought we might actually just introduce ourselves today. I'm, as you can see, alone over here. All of the other residents and apprentices and guests are on retreat right now in Berkeley, and so I'm in South San Francisco. I'm Jōshin, teacher at Oak. I've also trained at the monastic academy in Vermont for a long time. And my favorite type of bread is sourdough bread. So you can all go introduce yourselves and say your favorite type of bread or bread product of some sort. So maybe we'll start with, let me see what the order is. We start with Andre. Andre, if you're there, can you unmute and introduce yourself? You need to unmute. Maybe the button. There you go.
Yeah. Introductions. I was too busy finding the unmute button to prepare something to say. I am somebody who is exploring spirituality almost full time at this period of my life. And I guess I am open to lots of different schools of practice and so on, so I try to be somewhat exploratory. I primarily practice shamatha these days, but, ask me in a month. And my favorite type of bread would have to be 9-grain honey oat. There's they do this mix, it's a little bit of honey in it. It has a bunch of grains, supposedly, but anyway, it's the one I like the most.
Very good. And let's keep the introductions. So I'm not going to enforce it, but let's try to do 10 seconds or less, maybe 20 seconds total, of your name and anything else about you and your favorite kind of bread. So next is Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy. My favorite type of bread is Portuguese sweetbread, toasted with butter.
Nice. Great. And Lynn and Bob.
Hello, we're Lynn and Bob Benjamin. We hail from Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. We're Zeb's parents, Zeb Benjamin's parents. I am a bread baker. I bake every kind of bread imaginable. I have sourdough that's over 30 years old in my house that I use for my sourdough bread. And my favorite is challah bread, but I do make all kinds of grain breads as well, and Portuguese sweetbreads too.
Not to mention her famous Mexican cornbread.
Okay, thank you. Good to
Great.
see everybody.
Yeah, nice to see you. Maya.
Hiya, I'm Maya. I am Zev's friend. He invited me to this sit, even though I knew he wasn't going to be here because of the retreat. My favorite kind of bread is paretha, flatbread.
Mm. Very good. Naomi.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I am a reluctant software engineer and an enthusiastic community organizer. And my favorite kind of bread is San Luis sourdough, the sourest of sourdoughs.
Cool. And Pam.
How's this gonna look? Hello,
Mhm.
everyone. I'm Pam. I am in the San Fernando Valley today with my 4-month-old grandson, and so I'm gonna mute. I don't eat bread or ice cream, Jōshin.
Is there any other bread-like substance that you eat? If not, that's fine.
I love oatmeal, really
Perfect.
thick oatmeal. That's kind of like bread.
Totally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
See you too. And Renee.
I'm Renee. I'm Joshin's mom. I'm in Akron, Ohio. I'm working with joy, lots and lots and lots, and my favorite kind of bread is pumpernickel today.
Great. And Richard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard, Joshin's father, also in Akron, Ohio, and I love naan.
Nice. And Yanir.
Hi, everybody. Yanir from San Jose. I love lots of breads, and freshly baked breads of any kind are going to be, my favorite in that moment. I do love freshly baked pita in particular, but all breads are good.
Cool. Great. Well, really wonderful to hear from you all, and nice also to hear from some of the other folks who are tuning in as well. There's a talk that Soryu gave once, a long time ago. You can actually find it, I think, on our YouTube channel still, where there was a young child in attendance for the talk. It was at Maple and in the Zendo, and the child starts to speak, and the mother starts to get nervous, and Soryu says, "No, let her say whatever she wants." The adults need to be silent. The young children can make as much noise as they want. You just said it would be weird otherwise. I really appreciated that way of looking at things. So just know that I appreciate hearing from other people who are in the room. So no need to worry about that on our sake. So let's see. I spent the last week on solo retreat. I was very fortunate to have things be arranged by the community so that I could take off for a week, not interact with technology or social interaction really at all, and have that be okay. I don't know what happened over the last week, aside from the few things I've heard. I haven't watched Pan's talk yet, so I'm just going to take on faith that it was wonderful. And you can feel free to give any feedback on that or this or anything else anytime if you'd like to just email me. But I suppose that it was excellent. I'm grateful that Pan is here. Good. I have one vote that it was wonderful. Oh, very good. The solo retreat is always an interesting kind of experience. I am someone who joined a monastic community so that I wouldn't have to enforce discipline on myself to meditate. I'm not the kind of person who has an easy time meditating on my own. I will do everything I can to avoid it unless I've set things up so I can't. And so I've just outsourced that job to other people. So usually if I'm on retreat, there's someone ringing a bell and telling me when it's time to sit down and be quiet, when it's time to get up and get food and all of that stuff. So in that way, solo retreats are a bit of a challenge. And this time around, I really got to appreciate that quality of, as I was trying to point to in the meditation practice, setting things up so that practice happens. We really don't, in my experience, get to make all that many choices in our life. It's tiring to make choices. We easily get decision fatigue. And a lot of the time what we're doing is just following forces and gradients. Things are pointing in directions and we just go in those directions. And so the most important decisions that we can make are the ones that affect those gradients and forces. The ones that change the grooves of our life so that something happens by default that is different from what would otherwise happen. The one choice that I made last week, for example, is that I decided to just not take any electronic devices with me to the place where I was going on retreat. I didn't decide to just not use any electronic devices. I felt like that decision was too hard. I have been facing lately just how addicted I have become to electric devices, to phones and laptops and stuff. And so instead of that, I made the easier decision of just not taking them with me. To not use them if they're around for a week seemed hard, maybe impossible, but to just not take them with me, well, that's easy. You just do that once for a moment and then you're done. There's nothing else you can do about it. And so I didn't take anything with me. Locked myself in the house, far away from any electronic devices. And then it was pretty easy to not use electronic devices. It wasn't any choice anymore. It wasn't any decision about it. And luckily that worked. And as the retreat went on, as I kept on sitting, I got to notice why it is that there's such a drive to use electronic devices, why it is that I'm so interested in that. And it's that there's really quite a lot of suffering and experience. It's actually quite difficult to just sit there and not do anything. Sit there, not do anything, and then all of my patterns, my habits, my thoughts, my fears, my feelings just are there. And it's really tempting to just distract ourselves from that. It's really tempting for me to just distract myself from that by hiding behind a screen of some sort, going into some kind of pattern where I don't have to focus on that sort of thing. But as the week went on, I discovered something else. And by discovered, I say rediscovered. This is something I've discovered again and again, but last week rediscovered it once more. That as I continue to pay attention to this experience, as I continue to just not have any recourse but to have this experience, that suffering is resolved. That suffering is worked through. We, just through having this experience, find that there's a kind of joy in not avoiding this experience, and a kind of ease in not avoiding this experience. There's a kind of peace, tranquility, and happiness that comes as we allow all of that turbulence to quiet down. And in fact, a lot of the turbulence is kicked up by the things that we're using to try to distract ourselves from this experience. So it was really nice for me to get to the end of the week and have a phone again and notice, because everyone kind of knows this. I don't think I'm saying anything that anyone doesn't know or hasn't heard before or isn't aware of. But it's one thing to know about this, to have the sense that, yes, using a phone, for example, is not going to make me happier. It's just going to cause more suffering. And it's another thing to be so experientially clear on that in the moment that you don't actually want to use the phone anymore. So got to the end of the week and I found I'm considering what I should do. And normally I would play a video game or something if it was my free time, or do something on the internet or something like that. And just realizing as I play that out in my head that that's not going to be satisfying. I'm not going to be happier afterwards. And then actually just not want to do it. That was really nice. There are many other things that happened that week. I spent a lot of time out in nature. I feel very fortunate that I've usually been around nature in my life, at least a short walk away from it, or maybe at most a short bike ride. And so I was able to spend time around trees, bushes, shrubs, bunnies, birds, rocks, dirt, and just immerse myself in that. This turns out was another of those decisions that make it easier to make other decisions. To decide to just walk outside and not come back for a few hours, a pretty easy decision to make. And then once I'm outside, well, nature is helping me out. It's doing the work for me. I was walking up and down San Bruno Mountain. I would walk up and down that mountain quite a lot. It happens to be right behind me right now. And the nice part about San Bruno Mountain is that it's kind of steep in places. So as you're walking down, there are places where if you're not careful, you're going to lose your footing and fall down. And so if I was distracted by something, if I was thinking about some story in my life, this person did that to me, and how terrible was that, or how can I fix them or make them better or get rid of them or whatever, or I'm such a terrible person, how can I fix myself or make myself better, or I'm such a great person, I'm doing so good at this and doing such wonderful work in the world, or whatever it was that would come up. There were many different stories that would come up. Soon enough, I'd almost lose my footing. And then immediately in a moment, be back on the trail. Okay, can't keep thinking about this and also stay on the trail, so I'm just gonna stop thinking about this. And that decision is made in less than a second. It's made in maybe 1/10 of a second or less. It's boom, back on the trail. Here we go. It was really fortunate. The natural world is just set up that way. It's set up so that if we just spend time in it, we naturally get pulled out of our heads. It's not so easy to stay in our little imaginary world. So this basic principle, this point that the way that we structure things, the default settings that we apply to our lives, the choices that we make about what happens in our lives, this is what the Buddha talked about when he talked about karma. So karma is one of these words that has made it into the English language. It's been imported over for various reasons. We've decided not to translate it, but to keep it as the word karma, because it's quite actually an elaborate and a big teaching. It isn't something that fits cleanly into any single English concept. It's something that actually is quite complex. But as also often happens when words make it into the mainstream, this word has brought with it a number of connotations and ideas and concepts that aren't natively there. They aren't part of the word karma as it was taught by the Buddha. So it's commonly taught in the West. The sort of conception of karma in the West is that it's this sort of fatalistic force. We say, well, that's just my karma, when we're in a situation that is totally outside of our control, that we can't do anything about, where there's no choice but to give up and accept it. There's no choice but to accept it as it is. We say, well, that's just my karma. This terrible thing happened to me, that's because of my karma. And we have the sense, the things that happen to other people, that's because of their karma. And this could easily become kind of a fatalistic way of looking at things, where we say people aren't really in control of their actions at all. Everything that happened is just a result of what happened in the past. The teaching of karma is saying that everything that happened is the result of the past things that you did, good or bad, and you can't do anything about that. That isn't really what the Buddha meant. And it's interesting, actually. So we've been studying a text for a little while in this session, the Samanyapala Sutra, and it's been a number of weeks now, and I haven't yet gotten to the Buddha's answer to the question that's asked in the text. So the text is centered around a sort of question. The question is, what is the benefit of the holy life? What's the benefit of the Buddha's path of religious practice? What do you get for leading a spiritual life in the same way as other people get things from their vocations? What's the point? What's the benefit? We've spent a long time going through a bunch of different schools in ancient India, which so happen to be intact in the modern world, and hearing their non-answers to this question. There are a couple of these left. And what's interesting to me is that both of these, the remaining two views, are actually things that we now think Buddhism says. Both of the remaining two views are modern interpretations of Buddhism, and in fact, ways that people actually commonly teach Buddhism in the modern world. So the first is the teaching of Niganta Nataputta, which is sort of a stand-in for the founder of the Jain tradition, actually. So the person referred to in the Buddhist text as Niganta Nataputta is stand-in for Mahavira, who's the founder of a different religion or different school of training called the Jain tradition, which is actually still existent in the world. And at least as understood in the text, the Jains basically taught that at the time of the Buddha, that well, that rule of karma, that everything that you do is the result of past actions, and through ascetic practices in the present, you purify yourselves as a result of those actions. So you did bad stuff in the past, and if you subject yourself to self-mortification, to torture in the present, then you work off the karma of that. You work off the consequences of that, culminating in complete freedom with basically death by starvation. And this is something that people often seem to think Buddhism teaches. If you just go out into the world and you ask sort of a random person, what's the point of Buddhism? They say, well, you escape from the cycle of karma by sitting isolated from the world until you die, and then you totally escape from the cycle of rebirth. And that's the point. You know, it's sort of epitomized by sitting in a cave and not interacting with the world at all. The Buddha himself was pretty harsh about this view of teaching. He was kind of relentless on this point. It's actually it isn't really discussed in this text, but in another sutra, the Buddha actually says, basically, you know, it goes through a logical deconstruction of this teaching. So the teaching is that your past mistakes are causing your present suffering, and through ascetic practice, you work off the consequences of your past mistakes. And so he just asked some people who were practicing in this way, well, do you know that you existed in the past? Do you know that you didn't not exist in the past? And they responded, no, we don't know that. Because they had epistemic standards. They weren't just going to conclude that because they had memories of existing in the past, they definitely therefore existed in the past. They said, no, we don't know that we existed in the past. They said, do you know that you did bad things in the past? They said, no, we don't know that we did bad things in the past. Do you know how much of the bad stuff you did in the past has been worked through by your present teaching or by your present asceticism? Do you know if you've sat in you know, the various practices that they did, sleeping on a bed of nails, turning your head to one side, and keeping it that way until you can't swallow or eat anymore. Many other various ascetic practices, physical self-mortification. Do you know how much of your past karma is worked off by that? You've done this much and there's this much left to go. And they said, no, we don't know that. And so we basically pointed out there isn't really any basis for this teaching. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't actually work. Furthermore, you teach that the ultimate resolution of suffering doesn't come until physical death. That you have to physically die of starvation in order to fully work off all of this past karma. And you haven't heard from anyone about how that's gone. No one who has died of starvation has then reported to you, good news, it worked. So what's going on here? Why do you believe this? The Nigantas responded by saying, well, we have faith in our teacher. You have faith in Niganta Nataputta. That's why we believe it. So Buddha said basically, well, you know, faith in the teacher is good, but it isn't really all that reliable, trustworthy. You kind of have to verify it yourself. Yeah, you know, this could work out a number of different ways, having faith in a teacher and then based on that, doing this practice. So, and again, I should maybe pause here and say that while it's easy for us to have the tendency to look at this as a foreign practice, as something that those other weird people do, you know, ascetic practice is something that the weird ancient Indians did who are different from us in the modern world, we shouldn't see it in that way. We in the modern world are, I think, actually some of the biggest proponents of, believers in, and practitioners of asceticism in all of history. The main difference is that our asceticism takes the form of emotional torture rather than physical torture. We shame ourselves more than maybe anyone in history. You know, the sense that I did these bad things, and if I just abuse myself emotionally for all the bad things I did in the past, then I'm going to do better in the future. You know, the sense that if I shame myself enough, then I'll be a good person. If I denigrate myself, if I talk about my failings, my faults to myself enough, and feel bad about them enough, then that will result in me not making the same mistake. This is something that we really believe in and really do. And, of course, the same arguments apply. Do we know, first of all, that we existed in the past? Second of all, that we actually did the things that we remember in the past? But then, even more significantly, do we know how much shame has worked? Do we know how much of the way we are to being a good person based on having shamed ourselves this much? I've experienced this much emotional self-flagellation, torture, and that has made me this much better of a person, and I have this much more to go. If I shame myself this much more, then I'm going to be done with the path. I'll be a flawless, perfect individual. We don't know that. We can't say that. We actually don't really have a sense of how much it's working at all. We just have the ongoing sense that it kind of works. The sense that this shaming ourselves into being a good person kind of works. It seems like it works a little bit. And based on that, we just keep doing it. We have faith that it works. We believe that it works. And it isn't that it entirely doesn't work. We're not, just stupid. We do get a limited amount of mileage out of that. The fear of future shame can motivate us a little bit to change our behavior. That does work a little bit. The issue is, one of the issues is that shame is disabling. It's a form of negative feedback. The opposite of self reinforces. We would like it to be the case that we get energy to take future actions that are better than the ones we've taken in the past. But shame as a force tends to disable us, shut us down, and make us generally less able to do things at all. And so you apply that to the modern world at a large scale, then you find that the people who do the most things in the world are the ones who experience the least amount of shame. People who are doing most in the world are the ones who least engage in the practice of shaming themselves. In other words, the people who are most shameless, most willing to take action independent of whether it's shameful. And so it's very important even if we just want to improve the world, if we just look at the world and consider how should we practice so that the world is improved, it's very important that we find a way of doing this practice that isn't based on mere shame, that isn't based on disabling ourselves, that isn't based on a system of ethics that's based on punishment, on self-flagellation. Very important that we find a system of ethics that's based instead on gaining energy, on encouragement, on joy, on finding that there's a kind of pleasure in good behavior and feeding that cycle. Discovering that it actually feels good to be generous, for example. Very important that we experience that. And so this is essentially the teaching of the Buddha. That we, on the one hand, yes, use effort, exertion to not engage in bad behaviors, to not engage in unethical actions. We actually bring forth effort to change our lives so that that doesn't happen. And then on the other hand, that we experience that we let in the kind of joy that comes from virtue, kind of joy that comes from upright behavior, that comes from generosity, that comes from acting in accord with what is right, that we experience and feed that. And this is something that isn't just a mere product of past actions. It isn't that we have karma from the past, and then based on that, we have our present experience, and based on our present experience, we have our future experience. Instead, our present experience is actually participatory in our past and our future. We, in this moment, are experiencing both the result of past actions and of our present decisions, of the way that we are attending, the way that we're practicing right now. That's why with this practice, it's so significant that we use the posture in order to attend to the breath, or to the body. And we discover that through the present action of holding our body in a certain way, our attention naturally moves in different ways. This, of course, is just one of the influences of it. There's also the weight of habit, of momentum of past force. Our attention tends to go in certain directions, and it's going to tend to go in those directions. But through changing the way that we hold our bodies, we actually change those grooves. We change those patterns. We change the way that the attention will tend to flow. And I'll just again say that we can apply this at larger scales than just meditation practice. Or if you like, maybe a better way to say it would be that we can practice meditation with more than just this individual physical body. That the practice can extend, in fact, throughout our whole lives. One of the most significant choices that we can make is where we live and how we live and who we live with. That we can live with people who are walking this path. We can live with people who are attempting to cultivate goodness, cultivate virtue, cultivate joy, who are attempting to embody a less harmful, more beneficial way of life. We can actually move into such a place, like I have, because we see that we don't make that many choices, and we realize that if we can make the choice about what choices get made for us, that's of enormous impact. To change the way that we live our lives, to change the place in which we live our lives, to change the circumstances in which we live our lives has enormous impact. It has more impact than maybe anything else. That, for example, if I set things up so that I'm going to drive by a fast food place on my way to work every morning, then I'm going to eat a lot of fast food. If I bike to work in the morning, then I'm going to get a lot more exercise. Just for example, choices like that. Beyond that, if I live in a community of other practitioners, then I'm going to have to keep practicing. That's going to be the default. It's going to be harder to not practice than it will be to practice. Other people are going to hold me accountable to that. I'm going to be continually given opportunities to practice, invited to practice, encouraged to practice, exhorted to practice. That is going to have an impact on my life. Beyond that, if we live in places where we have to interact with other people, then we will interact with other people. If we live in ways that we don't have to interact with other people, then we won't interact with other people. It sounds so simple, and yet it plays out on the largest scale throughout the world. We've created a culture in which the default choice is that we don't interact with other people except in a few specified ways, transactional, well-defined and intentional ways. You set things up so that accidental interaction with other people is rare, so that we are lonelier than we maybe ever have been in history. But we don't have to do that. Those are choices, and we can make different choices. Beyond that, it's possible. Who knows? Well, let's just say it's going to be very hard, very unlikely to succeed, but it's possible, and it has happened before in history, that through the creation of communities that grow and that reinforce a different way of life, a different way of seeing things, and a different way of living, we actually change the dominant culture. We change the default way in which everybody lives. This, again, is something that has happened before in history. We've seen it happen a few times in history. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, caused a huge shift on a large scale throughout his culture, throughout ancient Indian culture, so that many people changed their lives. And there was total upheaval, the existing social order, in ways that I would say were largely beneficial. Again, 2,000 years ago, Jesus of Nazareth and those early practitioners who proclaimed his doctrine, his teaching, and his life and his sacrifice took over the world. And through taking over the world, growing from a small community of practitioners into a still small and somewhat uninfluential, kind of irrelevant group of slaves, grew from there somehow into a view that took over the entire world. And in a way that I think maybe is a bit hard to see, because we are so familiar with the negative consequences that came from that, also helped an enormous number of people, and non-human people as well. Helped people to live in a way that was not merely in accord with their own preferences. And through doing that, I would say at the very least bought planet Earth a few centuries of time before we went down the path that we've been going down of trying to get what we want, get our way, get our seek out pleasure and avoid pain, even at the cost of destruction of life on Earth. Helped us avoid that track for a little while, and in that way made it possible for us right now to have this conversation. If we consider that the next century or two or three, the Earth is, or at least life as we know it, is likely to be destroyed, climate change or nuclear war or technological disruption, you can really say that this one group of slaves 2,000 years ago gave us the chance to have this conversation at all. Gave us the chance to be around nature right now at all. Others have done this as well. Those are just two examples. This has happened maybe a dozen or more times throughout history. And that is the power that a community like this has. If we continue this practice, continue to relate, continue to connect, continue to grow, develop, and clarify our own minds, purify our own minds, to continue to discover the kind of joy that comes from generosity, the kind of joy that comes from virtue, and demonstrate and practice that as possible, at least. It's certain that that will change the world, and possible that it will change the course of history. So, thanks for listening so long. That was kind of a long-winded talk, but I know I didn't cover as much as I wanted to, as usual. There's still one more to go. I don't know if I'm even going to mention it next week or not. I really want to just get what was the Buddha's answer. I really want to get to the point here. But, well, here we are. In the interest of time and practice, I'm just going to cut myself off, and we'll spend some time in practice. So once again, checking in with our posture and continuing that same exploration that we were doing before. We're discovering and exploring the relationship between posture and attention. And this exploration, of course, has to be done in our own experience. We learn this through directly sitting in different ways, directly holding our body in different ways, and directly discovering the consequences of that. But many have offered guidance on this, and the guidance can be a little helpful. And so if you like, you can follow along with this. So begin in the lowest part of your body, your legs, your low body. Whether you're sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, explore sitting or standing or walking or lying down so that your legs, low body are stable, firmly connected to the ground, in stable, smooth contact, a platform, a foundation your whole body can grow out of. Making little adjustments this way and that, how to sit in a way that is stable. Or again, in any position, how can our base be stable? And bringing our attention into our tailbone, sacrum, base of the spine. And find out how to root our spine into that stable base. Where our spine isn't collapsed backwards or too far forwards. It is firmly anchored like a tree growing out of the earth into that stable base. Tucked under slightly. And moving into our belly, center of our body. Explore sitting in a way that is balanced, so that our center of gravity is in the middle of our body, not leaning to one side or the other, not too far forward or back. Our whole body plugged in and connected through that center, leading down the spine into that base. Some people find that there's kind of energy that comes from the earth, energy that can move through our body. And so with this, we sit so that our legs are firmly in contact with that energy, drawing it up our spine and connecting it to our center. It's as though we're immersed in a pool of liquid. Our body may even become taut. The energy of the earth filling our lower body. If that's available and experienced, then by all means feel free to explore that. And if not, then simply work with the posture as it is. Those 3 points of stable, rooted, and centered. And coming up into the heart, and chest, solar plexus, exploring how to open that. Commonly, this means that we move up, maybe a little forward in space, but our chest isn't collapsed, but is clear, tall, and open. We may feel that both the front and back of our chest, of our upper body, opens up and cools down, brightens up. As that same energy is to be able to flow through that. And finally, the top of the head, base of the spine, or pardon me, base of the skull, top of the spine. Let that extend upwards, elevated towards the sky. Our chin tucked slightly so that the back of our neck is more or less flat, not curved in, not collapsed or sunken. So that our whole body is one piece. And as we continue to explore the posture, see if we can go in the direction of this body being one piece. We go in the direction of body sensations being stably attended to. And take a lot of guessing and groping, moving around, trying different things. And at a certain point, it may come together. The posture stabilizes, and we find that our attention doesn't move. It just stays on the body. Doesn't even move to thoughts about how it's staying on the body. And having set this up, and simply give in to the flow of attention, letting it fill our whole body. And indeed, allowing it to flow as it will. And if you find that you've become distracted for a little while, your mind's been wandering for, say, 10 seconds or longer, then simply reestablish the posture. You move through those 5 points, just one by one, or all together, or in any order you like. And then once more, dive in. Diving in to body experience in this moment. Without needing to do anything about subtle distraction. In other words, if there are thoughts happening, but we're still attending to the body, and just let those thoughts be in the background. And if we find that the mind has been wandering, we haven't been attending to the practice for a little while, for 10 seconds or more, then we can reestablish the posture and start again. It's all good work. This whole cycle. Explore the posture, establish the posture. dive into experience, get distracted, establish the posture, explore the posture, dive in, get distracted. As we continue this process, we more and more clearly come to understand cause and effect. More and more clearly come to understand the relationship between posture and attention. More and more clearly become able to demonstrate and do this practice. Knowing that even if we're just sitting here and struggling with the posture and constantly distracted, thinking about irrelevant things, it's still a good use of time. We're still not avoiding this experience. We're still having this experience. And we can say yes, even to the experience of saying no. And even if we find ourselves shaming ourselves for this experience, and take heart, knowing that the Buddha didn't merely intellectually dismiss asceticism, but took it as far as it would go. Engaged in ascetic practices and took them as far as they would go in order to discover clearly for himself that they wouldn't work. So if we find ourselves experiencing frustration, shame, anger, getting upset ourselves, and perhaps we're just trying to get absolutely clear. Find out. Take that road as far as it'll go. Does it work? So that we can offer a clear teaching. Okay, so now is the time for discussion, questions, comments, reports, criticisms, joys, sorrows, whatever it is.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point during that guidance, you mentioned the 5 points, and I think the 5 points are, I think I only have 3 of them. The
Mhm.
3 I think I have are stable, rooted, centered.
Mhm.
Then what?
Yeah, so first of all, those are enough. So if you're just practicing being stable, rooted, and centered, then that's good practice. Actually, Soryu is on the record as having said that if you just fully do stable, if you just fully sit with a stable base, that's sufficient for awakening. If you just do that, okay? So there's more to it, but it isn't anything beyond just doing that completely. So first 3 points are stable, rooted, centered, and then the last 2 are open heart, solar plexus, and elevated top of the spine, base of the skull. I think the instruction for opening the heart is actually a little bit different between men and women. I think actually the whole posture is a little bit different between men and women. So I don't have direct experience of exactly what that is in your case, but the general principle is that you want your heart to be open. So it's, if you're connected with a sense of energy, there's, at least in my experience, there's a clear sense when I open up my heart of energy, brightness, emptiness, spaciousness, filling my chest and connected with the rest of my body as well. So let's go for that. And then the elevated part, again, the sort of energetic component of that is that you're letting energy in through the top of the spine. So it's this energy of heaven is able to connect with the energy of the earth, and you're just becoming a conduit. That's how some traditions talk about it. So that may be helpful in your case. Anything else on that?
It lit up for me when you brought in brightness in opening the chest, opening the heart. And that sense of being a conduit. So all I can do is make this motion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something that, so I'm personally really interested in. So there are a lot of different people talk about energy in different ways. A lot of traditions make a big deal out of ki, or energy, or chi, or prana, make that an essential and central component of the teaching. A lot of other people just don't think that it's a thing at all. They don't believe in it. They hear maybe someone talk about it in a kind of mystical sounding manner, and that sounds weird and off-putting, and so they say, I don't know about this. In my experience, it's been something that I went from not knowing anything, like not believing in, basically being skeptical of, to just directly experiencing and then having really ongoing, continual, direct connection with it. So it's not something that I've really brought into the teaching because I've been interested in, being palatable to skeptics. Something, I've been afraid of being criticized by skeptics as well a little bit, but it is something that I have a strong experiential sense of. So, just some thoughts on that.
So my thoughts on what you just said are that you can guide that energy without talking about it in the mystical schmystical sort of way. That you just did it. You just did. For my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually, it's kind of cool. Anyone know CFAR? Center for Applied Rationality?
I do.
Yeah, so some people do. So I did a workshop with them a few years ago, and at the end they had lightning talks. So I got to spend 3 minutes teaching the whole group of CFAR participants, which range from somewhat skeptical to extremely skeptical, to feel ki in their bodies. And people came up to me afterwards and were like, "Yep, totally did. Wow, that was amazing." So it was random fun fact.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yanir here. Yeah, I was reminded a lot of the guidance reminded me a lot of just the Zen practice. I've been doing that lately, exploring that as my kind of daily practice, and I know Soryu has his roots in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of made a lot of sense that he'd say all you need to do is just have a stable base, which is basically what sitting Zen is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And the posture is extremely important there, and you basically set us up for that posture, minus telling you how to put your legs, which is still an open thing, and people it can be extremely uncomfortable to do full lotus, and I can't do that yet. So, but it's an aspirational pose for me. But when I have forced myself into it, you lock into the most stable. I just can't hold it for very long, but because it's way too painful. But you're like, wow, it's like the next level of stability. So, it's something I'd like to try to implement. But yeah, so I enjoyed it, and yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, it sounded a lot like what I try to do every day with just sitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so the what that comes from is something called the Forall method, which was made by Soryu Forall. He didn't call it the Forall method. He just acquiesced to it being called the Forall method, since that's what people were going to call it anyway. And it's just his way of attempting to bring the practice into a new cultural context. So it's attempting to convey what he's learned throughout all of his training, which includes a lot of Zen and then also a lot of other traditions as well. So it's not surprising that it would, strike a chord or be familiar from a Zen perspective. Yeah, I don't understand it at all, but I do like the Zen teaching of Shikan Taza. Just sitting.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been struggling with that too, trying to understand it, and it's not an easy thing to understand, even though it's so simple a concept. I agree, it's very complicated to wrap your mind around. But what a breakthrough I recently had. I had some guidance from another teacher, Zen teacher, and she recommended a book. And what I got out of the book is that the point is the struggle. You should be struggling the entire time, and I was struggling up until then. Am I doing it right? Is this, am I going to get anywhere with this? And it's this where I stand with it right now, and understanding at least part of it, at least, is that it's the your ego struggle, and to kind of force it into constant struggle until it breaks and it gives up. Right. The whole point is you got to wear it down, and so yeah. And I heard a quote just today in a different Dharma talk, Zen Dharma talk, where there's some people, I never heard this before, where they had said that I'm paraphrasing, sitting Shinkantaza, or just sitting, it's like boiling oil over a hot fire, right? That's the experience of it. And it's not meant to be a comfortable, fun, Zen experience. It's funny how Zen means nothing. Like kind of like in your talk, the word Zen has been co-opted to mean peaceful, and that's not at all what's happening when you're sitting.
Yeah, it's more funny the more you look into those traditions.
Yeah.
Great.
But anyway, thank you very much, for the talk and for the guidance.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing that in perspective and experience.
I have some thoughts, many thoughts that have come up, especially since hearing people talk. I think the concept that the idea of Zen being peaceful sounds paradoxical on its surface, but the end result is a form of peace, right? And I think there's a social lesson baked into there, which I'm hyper focused on right now because I'm paying attention to all these sorts of like larger scale social forces. Because the conclusion that I keep coming to when I look at sort of conflicts between different political ideologies and things is the idea that when a thought form starts to stagnate in its own corner and it stops actually actively looking to struggle against other thought forms, that's when it becomes dangerous. And so you get this sort of like artificial harmony as a result of that stagnation. But really you're just masking a conflict, right? In that if thought forms would like to achieve the truth that they usually seek to espouse, right? So like there's the IDW thought form, there's the SJW thought form, there's all sorts of other ones, right? And if they would like to seek out, they actually need to struggle with each other. And I think internally, when we struggle with ourselves, in doing this practice and accepting the fact that it always feels like a struggle, it doesn't mean that it doesn't get easier. I mean, I misspoke. It doesn't mean that we aren't learning something. It doesn't mean we aren't getting better at it, right? And I'm really, really fortunate that I have a lot of like physical conditioning in my background and martial arts, where I've accepted the fact that even though I'm getting better at the thing, it doesn't mean it actually feels any different to show up and practice, right? It always feels different. It always feels difficult. But we do get better at it, which means that we do achieve better outcomes over time.
Yeah, really well said.
Thanks.
Yeah, since you always, I understand it in terms of sports metaphor, just because I've heard a lot of sports metaphors, not because I play a lot of sports. But it's like if you're playing a sport, you're always going to be losing about half your games. You're always going to be playing people who are about as good as you, even as you get better. And so the more you progress, you continue to have problems, and it continues to be difficult and a struggle, and that's because you're taking on harder and harder challenges. And as it should be, you get interested in more and more challenging situations. Soryu's a okay tennis player, pretty good tennis player. He could go into a middle school and spend all day long winning games of tennis, but that wouldn't actually even be that fun. It's actually more fun to go out to the edge. And then just really strongly agree with what you said about thought forms becoming dangerous when they isolate from struggling with other thought forms. It's something that we and I have been really concerned about, actually. Why it was so nice when, he hasn't been here for a while, but when Peter Bora was coming, because he, for whatever reason, would often have some sort of struggle with something I said. And it was very helpful to have that around. It's generally very helpful to have, someone who doesn't agree, doesn't see things the same way, isn't on the boat, because there's a real danger otherwise of just descending into a dream world. You just enter this fantasy land where everything's confirming your idea, but you're not actually growing. You're not actually learning anything. You're drifting away from reality. So very helpful in the training. You want to have the right proportion of skeptics. If it's all skeptics, then you're not going to get anywhere. If it's no skeptics, then you're not going to get anywhere. So just really appreciating that depth and clarity in that. Oh, happy to sit in silence with you, and anyone else is also welcome to share anything if they like.
So I could add something. Something else that I've been trying to incorporate into my normal practice, or as a mental state to approach sitting, is surrendering, completely surrendering to the pose and to your current state. And you mentioned it also, I think during the sit and also before in the talk about just kind of letting go. And I've recently been kind of really inspired by some stories I'd encountered about just letting go and trying to incorporate that. And I've had some pretty interesting experiences just this week, fairly dramatic but familiar experiences with that. And I feel like that's a very powerful component and of the practice. And now that I've you try to do it intentionally, it's also it escapes you. So there's a balance there. Yeah, and I'm still kind of wrestling with those experiences that I had. They were fairly dramatic and fairly scary. And so it's happened to me a couple of times, and each time I back off from practice. And this time I kind of backed off again, but not as much, whereas maybe like I took a day or two off, whereas before I might have stopped. I stopped sitting for a while. And yeah, so I'm still kind of dealing with that, because the experiences, like, they don't happen in the sit, they happen later, and a little less when I'm trying to sleep, a little less controlled circumstance. And so then you're on edge, and you might not sleep that night, which has happened to me. So but they seem like they're transformational things that I should embrace, but I resist those, and I don't let go. I've set myself up to completely surrender, and then I don't surrender later. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I don't know, I guess share. It's like a little bit of a personal share about something I'm currently dealing with, and it seems, and you mentioned it a couple times, so that's why I thought I would share. But yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that and how to handle that, because I don't know how.
Yeah, so the thing that you said is really strikes me, is that you just took a day off or so rather than just stopping completely. So as we keep going with this path, it's really a big picture, just a gradual acclimatization process. So we do the practice, we surrender, and then we discover the consequences of that surrender come up. And kind of just through continually doing it, you go through that experience 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. You start to discover more and more that it's okay to let go, that it's okay to give into it. So you go from at first, that kind of experience comes up. I don't know quite what it was in your case, but I've had similar kinds of experiences myself. So that comes up, and you say, all right, I'm actually not interested in practice anymore. I'm going to stop. Then the next time it comes up, you're like, this is terrible. I don't want to do it. But you keep doing it. Maybe you start up again the next day or two. Then it comes up again. You're like, okay, let's see what happens if we ride this for a second or two. Comes up again. You're like, okay, let's see if we ride this for a little bit longer. And gradually, before you know it, you're at the point where you're just floating on it. And you're discovering that that kind of release, that kind of surrender can carry you and is a source of huge bliss and enormous joy and peace until it starts to take over your whole life. So it's all just, you basically just keep going, and you, again, keep looking into the cause and effect relationships. So it often happens that we have the sense, for example, if I let go, if I surrender, then I'm going to die. And we're really afraid of that. And so we don't do it. Say, no, I don't want to do that. And we still have that sense, but we haven't actually tested it. And there isn't really a way to test it, because if we do die, then that's terrible, according to God.
Yeah.
So you just keep on, again, just through repeated exposure and staying with it. Kind of one way I like to talk about it is like titrating the dosage or something. You just try it again, try it again. It's like you're building a relationship with it, and you're discovering, again, just through repeated exposure, the suffering in this experience doesn't come from the surrendering, it comes from the grabbing on. The problem with this experience doesn't come from the letting go, it comes from
the holding on.
Yeah, the tightening up, the holding back. And so you discover, again, just through repeated exposure, to trust it. You discover that it is trustworthy. Or it's like you're building a relationship. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's comforting to hear. Yeah, I played with it a little bit a couple of times where I'll like let go more, and then I feel like I'm getting to a point where I can't let go, so I come back. And there have been a couple of times where I really had to put a lot of energy to coming back. And that was one of the more dramatic. That didn't happen this week. That happened a few months ago. And these windows seem to come with over the last now it's been a few weeks longer, but I had taken a long break. I don't mean to monopolize all the time if someone has to talk, but wants to talk, I can stop. But anyway, it seems to come with more diligent practice. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say, so one thing just to come to mind on that is you do want to ensure that you're grounding the energy into your body. So as you're having that experience of letting go, that you're letting it go into your lower body and fill your whole body. That you're not letting the energy get stuck anywhere in experience, but that it's grounded into your body. So if you find that as you're letting go, it's sort of a heady type experience.
Yeah, it's in the head. It's in the head.
Yeah, so then really work with the posture and with grounding that down. It's very important that, so if it's in the head, that's the sort of situation where as long as you're being careful about it, you're probably going to be okay, but you want to be, you don't want to take that too far without filling your body with it.
Okay, I hadn't even thought to do that, so it just seemed like that's where it was, and that's what it is. Thank you. I'll try to do that.
Yeah, so really bringing it, if you use the core muscles of your body, lower body, bring it down, hold it there, using that center of your body. If you don't, then again, it's not a big risk, but that is the sort of thing where when problems develop with meditation, which they do rarely, it's from that kind of experience being stuck in your head.
Oh, okay.
So just know that you want to bring it down.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Andy.
Did the Buddha have any particular like level of struggle, right? So like in the Frederick Douglass sense, there's without struggle there is no progress, which is one view. And another view is that, you know, if you're just anxious all the time, you're struggling all the time, that you can't ever be clear-headed enough to get anything done. And then in another sense, if you're just sort of walking amongst the clouds and in nature and just not having to deal with any struggle, you're not actually addressing anything. Is there some seesaw balance that, I don't know, 10% struggle, 50% struggle, 80% struggle? I know that that's reductionist terms. So if you could just talk for a moment about what is the level of struggle that one should be seeking for, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Totally. Yeah, so the Buddha, as it goes in the story, in history, or in the Buddha's hagiography, the term hagiography, this is kind of like glorify. It's the biography of a saint, but it's sort of known that this isn't just a factual accounting of events, but it's trying to impart a bigger message about spirituality and culture and the path and all of that. So the Buddha's hagiography, he spent 6 years working on the quest to awakening. And during those 6 years, most of it, or at least a lot of it, was spent in struggle. It was spent on ascetic practice. And like I said during the meditation, it was actually spent on really quite dramatic ascetic practice. So there's the passage in the sutras where it talks about this is actually, it's kind of nice as an adventurer, maybe you can appreciate this passage, because there's one section that describes the various different ascetic practices he does. And he starves himself until, he can, well, I'm not going to go into details, but he practices starvation of himself. He practices other kinds of self-mortification. And then there's this one passage where he practices something called the breathless meditation, which I guess means that you hold your breath until you can't anymore. And so he says, the thought occurred to me, suppose I practiced the breathless meditation. And then there came this like rushing, horrifying sound, like filling up my entire being, and great pain. And so he said, and then next paragraph, suppose I practiced the breathless meditation. And then he plugs his ears up, and then he does it again. And then he feels racking pain, like someone's tightening a belt around his head. Next paragraph, suppose I practiced the breathless meditation. And then it's just these increasingly horrific sounding experiences. And then each next paragraph again is like, suppose I practiced the breathless meditation. I don't know how many times, like 4 or 5 times. It's like, and the point there is that he took it as far as it would go, that he was in the position of having to completely and clearly say, any amount of self-mortification that anyone has ever done in history, I've done, and it hasn't worked. So it isn't exactly that he has to do that in order to walk the path, but he's doing that in order to basically say what isn't the path. And the sort of famed teaching of Buddhism is this middle way. He's teaching the middle way between, on the one hand, self-mortification, austerity, struggle, and on the other hand, indulgence, just following sense pleasure and doing the nice feeling thing all the time. He's set forth a way that's neither of those two extremes. And so ultimately, the amount of struggle is 0. you find a way of practicing so that you struggle less and less and have more and more joy, and you just follow that out. The kind of joy that is not based on sense pleasure. It's not based on getting the right thing to happen, getting the right experience, becoming the right person, but a kind of joy that goes beyond all of that. So what's the amount of struggle? I would say, just from my own experience, the amount of struggle is the amount that gets you to the point where you realize that there's no point struggling. You know? And then whatever your aspiration is. So if you just want to walk the path for your own sake, then just get to the point where you're satisfied for yourself. If you want to become a Buddha and save all sentient beings, then get to the point where you've totally confirmed that no amount of struggle is worth it by doing all of the struggle in the universe. And then you just kind of...
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good, so we're about at time. It's about 4. Again, just really appreciate all of you, your practice, your lives, your dedication, and that you show up. Really appreciate being connected to all of you. More to come. We'll be in touch, and take good care of yourselves.
Thanks, everyone. Love you.
Love you too. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.